Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's July 22nd, 2026, and I need you to stop scrolling right now because what CENTCOM just confirmed changes the entire shape of this war. 11 nights. 11 consecutive nights of American air power hitting Iran, and last night was the one where they finally went after the network that's been launching drones into Bahrain, into Kuwait, into Jordan, night after night after night. This is the video where we break down exactly what got hit, why it matters, and where this goes next. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand this war better than half the anchors on cable news. Let's get into it. So here's the headline, straight from the source, not from some rumor account, not from some anonymous Telegram channel. This is CENTCOM's own statement, posted at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time on July 21st. They said their forces had just completed the 11th consecutive evening of strikes against Iran. And this time, the target list included something new in the phrasing, not just command centers, not just air defense. This time, CENTCOM specifically named military operations, centers, maritime capabilities, aircraft hangars, drone storage facilities, and military logistics infrastructure. Read that list again. Drone storage facilities, aircraft hangars, logistics infrastructure. That's not a coastal radar getting knocked out. That's the actual plumbing of Iran's drone war being torn out by the roots. And I want to slow down right here at the top, because this is the part everybody skips past. When people say drone command network, they're usually picturing some Hollywood control room with big screens and a guy in a headset yelling coordinates. That's not really how this works, and understanding the real version is what's going to make the rest of this video click into place for you. A one-way attack drone, the kind Iran's been launching at Bahrain and Kuwait for weeks now, doesn't just materialize out of thin air and fly itself to the target. There's a chain behind it. First, you need the airframe itself sitting somewhere, fueled, armed, and ready. That's your storage facility. Second, you need a hangar or a hardened shelter to protect that airframe and the maintenance crews working on it from exactly the kind of strike that just happened. Third, you need the logistics tail, the trucks, the fuel bladders, the spare parts, the technicians who know how to load a warhead onto a one-way drone without turning themselves into a headline. And fourth, you need the operations center where somebody actually decides which target gets hit tonight and gives the order to launch. CENTCOM's statement last night said they went after 3 of those 4 links in the same 24-hour window. Storage, hangars, logistics. That's not a symbolic strike. That's a strike designed to make it physically harder for Iran to keep doing what it's been doing. Now let's talk about why last night specifically. Because context matters here, and I don't want you walking away from this video without understanding the timeline. This didn't come out of nowhere. Go back 1 week. On July 17th, Iran launched ballistic missiles at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. 2 American service members were confirmed killed in that attack, and a third was initially listed as missing before the Pentagon later confirmed a 4th soldier had also been killed. Sergeant Tyler James Feehan, 25 years old, from Hawaii. Private Isabella Gonzalez, 19 years old, from Texas. Sergeant Angel Rampersad, 28, from New York. I'm naming them because these are real people with real families. And this war has a body count that's easy to lose in the acronyms and the flight paths. Just 2 days after that, on July 19th, a separate American soldier, Sergeant Michael Emmanuel Swinton, 30 years old, was killed in Iraq during a controlled detonation of a downed Iranian drone. That brought the total number of American service members killed in this conflict to 18. 18. Let that sit for a second before we go back to the hardware. So when CENTCOM says they hit drone storage facilities and logistics infrastructure last night, that's not an abstract military objective. That's a direct response to American troops dying from exactly the kind of weapon those facilities produce and support. And Secretary of War Pete Hegseth basically said as much under oath, testifying in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee this week. He told lawmakers, quote, "Iran is at the weakest point militarily it has ever been at in the past decade," close quote. He went further, saying the campaign has put Tehran in, quote, "the worst place they've ever been," close quote. That's not me saying that. That's the Secretary of War, on the record, in front of Congress, with cameras rolling. All right, 30 seconds in, let's keep this moving, because there's a lot to cover and I don't want to lose you in the weeds. Here's what's coming up. We're going to break down exactly how a strike package finds and destroys a hardened drone hangar. We're going to look at the blockade numbers that most channels aren't even talking about. We're going to get into what Pickax Mountain is and why Trump just said the U.S. is going to hit it, quote, very heavily. And then we're going into the global picture because what's happening in Bulgaria and Lebanon right now directly connects to this drone story in a way that's genuinely wild once you see it laid out. So don't wander off. This gets better as it goes. Let's talk about the how, because knocking out a drone storage facility isn't like blowing up an open field. These sites are built to survive exactly this kind of attack. Iran learned, the hard way, over the first several months of this war, that anything sitting out in the open gets found and gets hit. So they moved a lot of their drone infrastructure into hardened shelters, into hangars reinforced with concrete, sometimes tucked into hillsides, or built with overhead covers specifically designed to defeat standoff munitions. That's where the targeting chain comes in, and this is where it gets genuinely impressive from a pure engineering standpoint, regardless of how you feel about the war itself. You start with intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR for short, which has been watching these sites for weeks, sometimes months, building a pattern of life. When does the technician shift change? When do the resupply trucks show up? What does normal activity look like versus what tells you there's something valuable inside worth a precision strike? Once a target's confirmed, you're typically looking at a strike package built around precision-guided munitions, things like the GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munition, which takes a dumb bomb and bolts on GPS guidance so it can be dropped from altitude and still land inside a few feet of the aim point. For the harder targets, the ones buried or reinforced, you're looking at penetrator variants designed to punch through a roof before detonating inside the structure, which is a far more effective way to collapse a hangar than trying to blow it apart from outside. And this is exactly why CENTCOM specifically called out aircraft hangars in their statement. A hangar isn't just a garage. It's a hardened structure built to protect what's inside it from the elements and from attack. Naming it specifically as a target set tells you the planners knew there was something worth protecting inside, and they went and got it anyway. Here's a detail that a lot of coverage is glossing over, and I think it's actually one of the more revealing parts of last night's statement. CENTCOM didn't give a number. They didn't say we struck this many targets or destroyed this many facilities. Historically, when the campaign wants to project overwhelming force, they'll throw out specific numbers, dozens of targets, multiple locations, precision munitions, plural. Last night's statement was comparatively restrained on specifics. That could mean a lot of things. It could mean operational security around a target set they don't want Iran mapping out from public statements. It could mean the strike was more surgical and smaller in scale than the multi-target barrages we saw in the first week of this renewed campaign. We don't know for certain, and I'm not going to pretend we do. But it's worth flagging because good analysis means telling you what we don't know just as much as what we do. What we do know, because Iranian state media themselves confirmed it, and multiple outlets independently reported the same locations, is where the explosions were heard. Bebahan, Mashhar, Bandar Abbas, Chabahar, Bushehr. Parchin. That's a wide geographic spread, stretching from the southern coast all the way up toward the interior, which tells you this wasn't a single concentrated raid on one facility. This was a distributed strike hitting Iran's drone and logistics network across multiple provinces in the same night. Air defense systems were also reported active in the Sohanak neighborhood in northeastern Tehran, west of Tabriz and near Sirik. Iran's own Noor news agency said air defenses in the capital were activated against what they called hostile targets. When your own state media is confirming your air defenses lit up in your own capital, that tells you something about how seriously Tehran is taking this. Now here's where I want you to lean in, because this next part is the piece almost nobody is connecting properly. This strike didn't happen in isolation. It happened inside a much bigger squeeze that's been building for weeks, and the drone infrastructure hit is just one jaw of a pincer that's closing from multiple directions at once. The first jaw is the blockade. CENTCOM has been enforcing a naval blockade against Iranian ports, and as of July 21st, they confirmed they've redirected 8 commercial vessels and disabled one to enforce it. Now flip that around and look at the numbers from the other side. Since early May, CENTCOM says it has helped facilitate the transit of approximately 900 commercial vessels and 450 million barrels of crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz, while simultaneously telling us that Iran has attacked more than 30 commercial vessels transiting that same waterway over the past 3 months. So you've got the U.S. Navy essentially running security escort for global shipping through one of the most valuable choke points on Earth, while Iran tries to punch holes in that security with missiles, drones, and mines. Every drone storage facility that gets taken off the board is one less launch platform Iran has available to keep making that waterway dangerous. The second jaw is diplomatic isolation, and this is the part that surprised me a little when I dug into it. The United Kingdom just got a new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, who took office on July 20th. Within 24 hours of taking power, according to Bloomberg's reporting, Burnham approved continuing to let the U.S. use British bases at Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford to support strikes on Iran-linked targets threatening shipping in the Strait. That's a brand new head of government, barely a day into the job, and one of his first acts is greenlighting continued military cooperation against Iran. That tells you something about how baked in this coalition has become. It's not one administration's pet project anymore. It's surviving changes of government on the other side of the Atlantic. And then there's Bulgaria. This one's fascinating, and I don't think enough people caught it. Bulgaria's Parliamentary Defense Committee approved a proposal to station up to 8 US KC-135 aerial refueling tankers and 250 American military personnel at Besmer Air Base, running from July 24th through October 1st. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Esmail Baghaei, actually issued a direct warning to Sofia over this, calling any support for U.S. operations against Iran, quote, the crime of aggression and war crimes, close quote. Bulgaria's own Vice President Ileana Iotova pushed back, saying the move wouldn't make Bulgaria a party to the war. But think about what aerial refueling tankers actually do strategically. They're not shooting anybody. They're the invisible force multiplier that determines how far a strike aircraft can fly and how long it can loiter before it has to go home. Position tankers closer to the theater, and suddenly, aircraft that used to have a hard operational ceiling can range deeper, stay longer, and hit targets that used to be just outside the envelope. If you're wondering how the U.S. is sustaining 11 consecutive nights of strikes without the fleet running ragged, tanker positioning like this is a big part of the answer. The third jaw, and this might be the one with the highest ceiling of all, is Pickax Mountain. President Trump was directly asked this week whether the U.S. will strike that site, and he didn't hedge. He said, quote, we'll be hitting that area probably pretty soon, and there's not a thing they can do about it, close quote. Pickax Mountain is a heavily fortified underground complex near Iran's already damaged Natanz enrichment facility. International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors haven't been allowed anywhere near it. When Trump was asked whether he believes Iran has moved nuclear centrifuges into that mountain, he said, quote, they may have, but we follow the material. That's where the action is, close quote. Now, Secretary Hegseth was asked point blank in that same Senate hearing whether the U.S. military has the capability to reach whatever's buried under that mountain. And while he wouldn't get into specifics, citing classification, he said, quote, if anybody in the world can reach anything on God's green earth, it's the United States military, the most powerful military in the world, close quote. I want to be straight with you here, though, because good analysis means giving you the skeptical view, too, not just the confident one. James Acton, who co-leads the Carnegie Endowment's nuclear policy work, has publicly said he doubts the U.S. can do much more against a target that deep than collapse the access tunnels. So even inside expert circles, there's real disagreement about what a Pickax Mountain strike would actually accomplish. That uncertainty is worth sitting with, not steamrolling past. Let's back up for a second and put last night inside the full arc of these 11 nights, because the campaign didn't start with drone hangars. It built up to them, and the progression tells its own story. This latest phase of the war reignited on July 8th when Washington resumed strikes citing Iranian aggression against commercial shipping, after a memorandum of understanding signed back on June 18th had briefly paused the fighting. Iran called that resumption a serious violation of what had been agreed and immediately began retaliatory strikes against U.S. bases across the Middle East. From there, the target sets escalated night by night. Early strikes focused on coastal radar and fast attack boats. Then came missile storage sites and command centers. Then islands like Keshem and Greater Tunb, which Iran itself has called its unsinkable aircraft carriers, got hit hard enough to knock out the coastal surveillance apparatus tracking shipping through the strait. Bridges connecting Iran's rail network to China and Russia through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan were taken out, cutting off a resupply corridor. A deep water port on the Indian Ocean, Chabahar, was hit hard enough to destroy its control tower entirely. By the time you get to Night 11, you're not looking at a campaign that jumped straight to drone infrastructure. You're looking at a campaign that worked backward through Iran's entire warfighting apparatus, layer by layer, until what was left standing was the drone network itself. Now let's talk about the platforms actually capable of executing a strike like this, because understanding the hardware helps you understand why Iran hasn't been able to stop any of it. Precision strikes on hardened hangars and storage facilities generally aren't the kind of thing you send a single aircraft to do alone. You're typically looking at a layered package. Electronic warfare aircraft go in first to jam or destroy enemy radar, using high-speed anti-radiation missiles that home in on any radar system foolish enough to turn on and start looking for the incoming strike. Once the airspace is blinded, precision strike aircraft carrying satellite and laser-guided munitions come in to put weapons directly on the hardened structures. And for targets requiring real mass and range, standoff cruise missiles launched from well outside Iran's air defense envelope entirely can be routed in at low altitude on terrain following paths, meaning the launching aircraft never has to cross into contested airspace at all. Naval assets add another dimension. The USS Mason, a guided missile destroyer, was shown by CENTCOM this week being resupplied at sea as part of what the command is calling Operation Epic Fury, supporting the reimposed blockade on Iranian ports. That's a warship sitting in regional waters, actively enforcing the same squeeze that the airstrikes are executing from above, air and sea working the same problem from two directions. Let's talk money for a second, because war costs money, and Hegseth put a number on it this week that deserves more attention than it's getting. Testifying to the Senate, he told lawmakers the Iran conflict has cost an estimated $37.5 billion so far, a figure that includes both current operational spending and projected costs through the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. When Senator Dick Durbin pressed him to clarify exactly what that number covered, Hegseth confirmed it includes military pay, operations and maintenance, and anticipated future costs. $37.5 billion. And that's before whatever a Pickax Mountain operation would add on top. And President Trump, in his own way, tried to put that cost into historical context this week. He posted a comparison on Truth Social listing major American conflicts side by side with their death tolls. Afghanistan, 20 years, 2,000 dead. Iraq, 9 years, 4,600 dead. Vietnam, over 19 years, 58,220 dead. Korea, just over 3 years, 36,574 dead. And then Iran, 4 months, 18 dead. I'm not going to editorialize heavily on what that comparison means. I'll let you sit with those numbers yourself. But I wanted you to have the actual figures the president himself put forward, because context is context, whichever direction you take it. One more piece of this puzzle before we go global, and it's the piece that actually shows up in your gas bill, so pay attention. Reporting this week cited data from marine traffic showing that daily shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has regularly dropped into the single digits since U.S. Iranian negotiations collapsed. Think about what that means against the backdrop of those 900 vessels and 450 million barrels, CENTCOM says it's helped move since early May. The strait itself carries roughly a fifth of the world's daily oil supply on a normal day. When daily transits fall into the single digits, that's not a minor slowdown. That's a choke point operating at a fraction of its normal throughput, even with the Navy actively running escort. And the market has noticed. Oil prices have pushed past $93 a barrel amid the ongoing exchange of strikes, according to reporting out this week. Every family filling up a car, every business paying to ship goods, every country importing energy through that corridor is feeling this war, whether they're following the headlines or not. That's the part that turns a regional conflict into a global one, and it's exactly why CENTCOM keeps hammering that phrase in every single statement, further degrade Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping. This isn't just about protecting sailors, although it absolutely is about that too. It's about keeping a fifth of the planet's oil supply moving through a strait that one country has been trying to turn into a weapon. All right, we're deep into the video now, so let's push into the global roundup, because I promised you this connects, and it genuinely does. This isn't a random detour. This is the same war viewed from 3 other angles. Start with Iraq. Just this week, 3 explosive-laden drones were shot down near the U.S. consulate in Erbil, the capital of Iraq's Kurdistan region, according to security sources cited by Reuters. Erbil International Airport had to temporarily suspend flights because of it. This happened just after the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad issued a global security alert, warning that, quote, escalating tensions in the Middle East could lead to further attacks on U.S. diplomatic facilities, close quote, and specifically noting that U.S. diplomatic facilities outside the Middle East have already been targeted too. So this isn't staying contained to battlefield hardware. It's reaching consulates, airports, and diplomatic posts across the region. That's exactly the kind of spillover that a functioning drone command network makes possible, and exactly the kind of spillover that degrading that network is supposed to choke off. Then there's the Red Sea threat, which honestly should be getting more coverage than it is. Reuters reported, based on 3 separate sources, that Iran's leadership has discussed directing Yemen's Houthi rebels to shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait if the U.S. strikes Iranian power infrastructure, and that this request has already been conveyed to the group. A source close to the Houthis told Reuters that missiles and drones have already been positioned near the waterway, waiting for an order to begin attacking shipping. President Trump was asked about this directly and said, quote, we'll see what happens. So far it hasn't happened, might happen. But we take care of things. If something like that happens, we take care of it, close quote. Think about what that would mean if it actually happened. You'd have 2 of the most strategically vital waterways on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb, both under direct threat simultaneously. That's not a regional dispute anymore. That's a live threat to global shipping lanes that the entire world economy depends on. And then there's Lebanon, which is the one story this week that's actually moving in a hopeful direction, and I think it deserves airtime precisely because it's not more explosions. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun met with President Trump at the White House this week. This follows a trilateral framework agreement signed between the United States, Israel, and Lebanon back in late June. which set out a plan for Israeli forces to withdraw from parts of southern Lebanon while the Lebanese army takes over security responsibility alongside a broader push to disarm Hezbollah, the Iran-backed group that's operated inside Lebanon for decades. The State Department announced the first so-called pilot zones had begun operating in 3 villages this week. It hasn't been friction-free. The Israeli military said it fired warning shots after Lebanese forces reportedly crossed into a security zone outside the agreed pilot area, though both sides confirmed no injuries, and the Lebanese personnel withdrew. But step back and look at the bigger picture. While the UPS is degrading Iran's drone infrastructure with one hand, it's simultaneously working a diplomatic track with the other, trying to peel Hezbollah's operating environment away from Tehran's influence entirely. That's the dual-track strategy in action, except this time it's Washington running it instead of Tehran. I also want to give you the dissent, because a fair breakdown includes the pushback, not just the wins. That same Senate hearing where Hegseth laid out the $37.5 billion price tag was repeatedly interrupted by protesters holding signs reading, "No war on Iran," with one shouting that his hands were, quote, "bloody," close quote, before Capitol Police escorted several of them out of the room. Senator Chris Van Hollen directly challenged Hegseth's characterization of the conflict as a fight the U.S. is winning, and Hegseth pushed back hard, telling lawmakers, quote, "Iran started this war 47 years ago, and they've killed thousands of Americans, including our brothers on the battlefield in Iraq," close quote. Whatever side of that exchange you land on, both things are true at the same time. The Pentagon's own testimony says this campaign has degraded Iran further than at any point in decades, and there are elected officials and citizens in that same room saying the human and financial cost isn't being justified clearly enough. That tension isn't a distraction from the drone story we started with. It's the exact debate that determines whether campaigns like last night's continue at this pace or start winding down. So let's zoom all the way out and put the whole board in front of you, because this is where it all connects. Iran's operational model for most of this war has depended on being able to project force asymmetrically, using cheap, deniable, hard-to-trace platforms like one-way attack drones to threaten expensive targets like commercial tankers and forward-deployed military bases, all while keeping enough diplomatic ambiguity alive to avoid a full conventional confrontation it can't win. That model needs 3 things to function. It needs the physical hardware sitting somewhere, fueled and ready. It needs the logistics tail to arm, maintain, and resupply that hardware. And it needs enough uncontested airspace and geography to keep launching without immediate consequence. What we watched happen over these past 11 nights, and specifically in last night's strike on drone storage facilities, aircraft hangars, and logistics infrastructure, is a systematic attempt to remove all 3 of those requirements at once. You take away the storage, the platforms have nowhere safe to sit. You take away the hangars, whatever's left is exposed to the next strike. You take away the logistics, even the drones that survive can't get armed, fueled, or serviced fast enough to keep the tempo going. And layer on top of that a naval blockade, squeezing Iran's oil exports, a coalition of allied nations, including a brand new British government and a newly committed Bulgaria, keeping the basing and refueling infrastructure available to sustain the tempo, and a president publicly signaling the next target might be the regime's most protected nuclear site. And you start to see why Hegseth was comfortable telling Congress under oath that Iran is at its weakest point in nearly 5 decades. None of that means this is close to over. Iran's own military command, the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, issued a direct warning this week that any U.S. strike on nuclear facilities would be, quote, regarded as an escalation of conflict across the region, close quote, and separately said U.S. interests and allies would face what they called a powerful assault if Washington moves on Pickax Mountain. Iran still has capabilities left, ballistic missiles, proxy networks stretching from Iraq to Yemen to what remains of its influence in Lebanon, and 18 dead American service members are proof enough that this network can still land a lethal blow even while it's being systematically dismantled. Hegseth himself acknowledged that directly under oath, saying Iran, quote, still has capabilities, no doubt, close quote, even while insisting the cumulative damage has been historic. So here's where I want to leave this with you, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Because this is exactly the kind of moment where the next week could break in a few very different directions. Does the U.S. actually go ahead and strike Pickax Mountain, or does that stay a rhetorical warning meant to pressure Iran back to the table? Does Iran actually greenlight the Houthis to move on the Red Sea, opening up a second strategic choke point at the same time as Hormuz? And does degrading this drone network night after night eventually force some kind of negotiated off-ramp, the way it did briefly back in June before this all reignited? Or does 18 dead Americans and counting mean this only goes one direction from here? One last data point before we close this out, because it matters for how you read everything else in this video. Iran's own military command structure hasn't gone quiet through any of this. The Qatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters is still issuing statements through IRNA. Iranian state television and semi-official outlets like Fars and Tasnim are still confirming, in real time, which of their own cities got hit each night. That's worth noting because it means we're not relying purely on American claims to verify this campaign is happening and having an effect. Iran is, in its own way, confirming the damage every single night, even while framing it as unprovoked aggression. When both sides of a conflict are independently confirming the same strikes in the same cities on the same nights, that's about as solid as open source verification gets in a war zone. Drop your take in the comments. Tell me which of those 3 threads you think snaps first. I read every single one of them, and honestly, some of the sharpest analysis I see on this war comes from you guys, not from the people getting paid to talk about it on television. If this video helped you actually understand what happened last night, instead of just seeing another headline scroll past you, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because I'm going to be covering this every single time CENTCOM puts out a new statement, and there's clearly a lot more coming. Drop a like if you want more of these deep breakdowns instead of the surface level stuff everyone else is putting out. And let me know down in the comments what you want covered next, whether that's a deeper dive into the blockade numbers, the Pickax Mountain target itself, or what's actually happening on the ground in Lebanon right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.